Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Owl Pod, the official podcast of Temple Athletics. I'm your host, Kevin Copp, and my guest today is former Temple rower Kathleen Stengel. Kathleen is a 1998 graduate of Temple University and a four-year member of the Temple women's rowing program, which she joined as a novice rower and go on to win a Dad Vale championship in the second varsity 8 boat as a junior in 1997. After graduating from Temple, Kathleen got her master's degree from the University of North Texas and currently serves as the Chief Executive Officer at NeurAbilities Healthcare. She is a member of the Board of Visitors for Temple's College of Education and is a passionate advocate for women's sports, particularly through her efforts at launching Diamond Dreams alongside another of our favorite Temple grads, Sharifa Howarth, which is a philanthropic effort designed to expand and solidify lasting support for all women's sports here at Temple. This is a great conversation with truly a Temple-made and Temple-proud alum, Kathleen Stengel, after this quick word from our Alpod sponsors.
From Westchester to Doylestown, from Drexel Hill to Lansdale to Philly, we all look out for each other, stepping up to keep our communities going strong. And at Independence Blue Cross, we're here to keep you going strong. We've been deeply rooted in our communities for more than 85 years. And that connection to members has earned us our spot as the #1 health insurer in the region. So while you look out for your neighbors, know IBX is always looking out for you. Learn more at IBX.com.
I'm interested because there's so many different paths to rowing in college. There's so many different entry points to it. What was yours? How did you come to be a rower at Temple to start?
Well, it wasn't a high school sport for me. I went to Archbishop Bryan in Northeast Philadelphia, and I was actually a soccer player. So I was a goalie. I ran track. I had a lot of cardio that I had already done. Started at Temple, and I was paying out of pocket for a lot of things, and I was the first in my family. I'm one of 7, but I was the first to actually go to college and graduate from the university. So I ended up walking across campus one day, and the team was out there with a boat, and they were recruiting novice, and they said, you don't need any experience, you just have to understand it. And prior to that, I had been down to the boathouse. I had taken some I went to an ergo rodeo as part of just continuing to build up my athletic. Like, I was really into soccer at that point and also running, but I didn't necessarily want to do that in college. So going to Temple, I didn't start off, or I didn't get recruited in. I was a walk-on. I was a novice, and that first year was painful. We ran up and down the stairs 1,002 times before we even saw an oar. But the ladies on campus had right of the bell tower. They had the boat out there. I watched them walk across, and it was just so powerful to me to see these amazing women walking across, flipping over and saying, you can, in fact. And I'm a tall woman, so, they picked me out because, rowing favors those with height. And they said, you can come on, try it out. You'll get up to be a part of these different things. And then there's obviously scholarship opportunities, so at that time, they definitely was NCAA. Women were building up that particular team, and I think it had just started. But my novice coach, Vince Fitzpatrick, he was he's an amazing person. He's very involved in rowing, but I think he saw something in a bunch of these women who were coming in, and we were hungry. We were gritty. We wanted to go to school. We wanted to, I was working jobs, but also I wanted to be able to work for that college scholarship. That to me was the dream. So after year one, second year, we got a partial scholarship, and that was like, that's it. I dropped everything. I said, I am going to be a rower from now till the end of time. I didn't know what I wanted to do for a job, Back then, I didn't think it mattered to me. I'm like, no. I'm sure they get paid in the Olympics. They don't, by the way.
Right.
So it wasn't like a professional sport, but I fell in love with. Obviously, I'm a cherry and white person all the way through. I wear the colors, but when you're on a team and you have that camaraderie, and it's a difficult sport when you're waking up at 4 a.m. every day. And I still lived at home that first year, so I would take the 20 bus to the L down at Bridge and Pratt, and then shoot up and ride my bike from there to the it was painful, but it's Temple grit is a real thing, and it was a badge of honor to see how hard it was, but you can still do it. And you kept going and kept going and kept going. People dropped out. People did try it out and then said, this isn't for me, and they would come and cheer us along. But I fell into it and I fell in love.
Well, there had to be a point. I mean, you have to have that grit and that determination. I mean, if you're thinking, okay, I have some success running or playing soccer, but it sounds like you had kind of made the peace with, okay, that's the end of it. At least in terms of pursuing. Did you ever think about pursuing a college scholarship in one of those sports, or
Um,
did that kind of?
I actually did have an offer from Loyola University at the time, but it was a partial scholarship. And even with the partial, it was, three times as much as Temple University without any scholarship. So for me, it was trying because I had to pay for myself. So it wasn't,
One of
I didn't
seven,
have
yeah, yeah. I would
one
say,
of seven.
I would say
Dad was
so.
a cop, mom worked at the hospital, so it was, and I was number three. And being number three coming in, like the I wanted the college degree. I knew I wanted more. And so it was, how do I figure out how to pay for this? But also, if I'm not going to get a scholarship for running, which I wasn't that fast. That's why I was a goalie in soccer because I was big and got in the way of the ball. Um, but what's interesting about crew is you don't have to have that hand-eye coordination. You don't have to have anything. You have to have just power and grit, and you have to just be willing to work for it. And I felt like that sounds exactly like me. I'm willing to work for anything that I get, and having a group of people around to cheer you on. And like rowing in Philadelphia is just an amazing opportunity. It's definitely, Philadelphia is an amazing rowing town, and that camaraderie, and you become a part of something greater than that of yourself, and it's pretty spectacular.
Well, there is something
So
that is really special and cultural about it. You're right. In fact, I just had a family friend, a friend of mine from college at Georgia, came up with his family for the weekend and was asking about Boathouse Row. That was one of the things he knew about Philly. He's like, oh, I want to see, what's the thing where all the boathouses are lined up and the lights are on. So, it is so endemic to this city in a really special way. And I'm just wondering, obviously you talk about, going from entering as a novice rower, you get your partial scholarship, you work your way up through kind of the rowing structure that there is here to the varsity program by the time you graduate in 98. Just tell me about what the experience was like here, as a student athlete, starting out as probably as tough as you could have a starting point coming in, like you said, doing all this work, running stairs without touching an oar to where you were able to get to with this team over the course of your 4 years.
well, I think again, it is a team sport, and you have to be able to pull your weight, so to speak. So um, it was a lot of working out. So when you're on the water, it's 5 a.m. in the water, middle of the day, you had to structure your classes so that you would have to go and do your lifting because, you have to build up the muscles, you have to build up capacity, and then, back on the river at 3 or 4, and then back off the river, sometimes 6, maybe 7, as late as you could get on, as possible. But so it really was like a job. Like crew was what I went to school for, is what I would say. And, classes were my side hustle. Um, but to be fair, like what was amazing about Temple was like all the teachers, and I was in the psych department. I had an undergrad and psych degree. The psychology department was super supportive. They knew, and I think looking back, just crew was what was able to kind of ground me. And, we had a t-shirt that said, I can't, I have crew. So we weren't partiers. If we had parties, we were like back in bed by 8
Well,
o'clock.
yeah, it's
We
tough.
weren't,
It's tough when you have the alarms coming that early. It's tough to really let your hair down.
yep. So, so I'm sorry, we have crew. Um, but what it did was it structured my day such that I was able to, get my work in for crew, and then classes were important, and you kind of just leaned into classes. And then I was able to lean into kind of the support that they gave the athletes, which was, you could go to a tutoring on the side or make sure that, you had some support. But I was very, very lucky. All my professors were, supporters of the athletes, and they would make sure that I had what I needed in order to be successful in the classes as well as in rowing. But by the time summer came, you got lazy, or at least I got lazy. I don't think any rower out there would say that they got lazy, but by the time May rolled around, you're tired, and you're going back home. Obviously, I worked a couple of jobs over the summer, but then that fall coming around, you're like, oh gosh. So by August, you're like, all right, let me get back up and run 5 miles so that I'm not super sore. By the time we go to 3 a days again. The hardest part of crew is sometimes that winter break when you're not on the river, when you're on the machine, which is the erg. We call it the ergometer. It's the erg, and I curse it still to this day. Because the erg does tell you it is really it is your measure for how well you'll row on the river, but it's not as fun. You don't have the wind whipping in your face, and you don't feel the oar and the Schuylkill River smell, which, believe it or not, you fall in love with. Um, so that was probably the hardest part over the winter. That was when you'd get into the doldrums. But we'd run up the stairs in I want to say it's Conwell, but it's not Conwell. It's the tech building on Broad Street. We'd run up to the 15th floor um, 20 times because you were having to build up.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I talked to Rebecca, and Rebecca says, "Yep, we still do it." And I'm like, "Oh, those poor kids."
Yeah.
But back then you're running up and you're like, and you're coming back down the stairs. And people would come out of their offices to use the stairs to maybe go up 2 or 3 floors, and they would just look at us like we were insane. And we
Yeah.
were literally the insane crew running up and down. But by the time my junior year hit, and it was varsity, we won the Dad Vales, and that was probably the pinnacle of, we won by a bow ball. And it was in the Inquirer, and it was one of those situations where, you were rowing that whole day because it's in heats, and all of us were just quiet. It was a very odd time. We were just quiet because we knew we had it. We had clicked. And when you're in the boat and you just know people are in the right place, you can count on the person in front of you, behind you, and your coxswain's going to keep you, in line. And that day is a very challenging day. The Dad Vales mean a lot. It's down over in New Jersey, but I'm hoping it'll come back to the Schuylkill.
Yeah.
But that particular moment in time where we all waited at the end, and we were waiting. It was a photo finish, and we're holding hands, and it's like we're waiting, and we won by a bow ball at the very last minute photo finish. And I'm like, man, I could retire now. This is the greatest point in my career. And that story has really pushed me in my career, actually. It's a never give up. Like, like it was always against Delaware. Delaware was our big one, that University of Delaware girls. And I know we're not allowed to say this, but we used to bet shirts at the starting line.
I think the
They
statute
don't
of
do that
limita- I think
anymore.
the statute of limitations has expired. You're good.
So you're like, all you wanted was that Delaware shirt
Mm.
because all season long, and then afterwards when they came to our tent, we're all having, um, pretzels, and after we won, it was like hugging. But, I wore that Delaware shirt you know, till it started to fall off because it was that moment of pride.
Sure.
So that was pretty spectacular. And then, my last year I was able to, I redshirted for part of the year just because I needed to get an internship. I did realize at that point I needed to get a job
I was going to say
and
we're
get
going to
into
get back to
graduate school.
that. At some point, it stopped becoming a side hustle for you, so we can get to
Yeah, I
that.
was like,
Yeah.
uh-oh. Um, but I was still very much enmeshed. We lived in a house of all women rowers, and, we called it the Orr House. Hopefully I can say that on the air as well. Um, but it was, a house full of women who were all rowers and coxswains. So it was one of the greatest experiences of my life. And then I went to graduate school, and things got different, but that experience I still to this day, my husband will make fun of me and start singing Glory Days whenever I start talking about it. Go back in the day. But yeah, it was spectacular. So still to this day, like, I'm a big fan, and I feel like the women athletes really deserve a lot of kudos. We don't get the same level of support at a very early age, just from a cultural standpoint. And the duration with which women have been in sports and have had that, like, I think we're a little bit further behind. So, I've made it a point to continue to try and make sure and support the women athletes, not just rowers. I am biased, obviously, but all of the women athletes have something special. And when you meet them, it's like, I want to support that, like, these are our future leaders, and I can see it in them now. And I know that sport really instills a level of responsibility, accountability, and drive that you just don't see everywhere.
No, I agree, and I do want to come back to the advocacy angle of it, but I do think there is something really unique and specific to rowing, because I hope I'm saying this right. I think work to payoff ratio in rowing is maybe the highest of any sport, because your entire season, give or take, is, I don't know, 6 or 8 races of about 6 or 8 minutes. The amount of behind the scenes, at least you're playing soccer, you get a 20-game season, the games are 90 minutes long, you're getting a certain amount of time to actually do the competition. The amount of work behind the scenes in rowing compared to the amount of time you're actually out on the river and in a real competition is vanishingly small compared to all of the work that it's the proverbial tip of the iceberg compared to everything that's below the surface. So I do think there is something particular to rowing about kind of the unseen, unheralded, work that goes on behind the scenes.
And I think people respect that. So the
Yeah.
nice thing is people do say on a regular, like, oh my gosh, we saw you doing this, and we only saw you on the river for like 3 heats, and it was a total of 15
Yeah.
minutes. 15 minutes of glory, is that worth it? Well, I think that's the reason, and most of us are a little bit nuts. We all have a little something different in us that says that we need to push a little bit harder. And it's not about the glory, it's about the journey, I think. At least for me, it was. And I think a lot of the rowers that I know, they didn't, you go out to win because we're competitive, obviously. But just even the working out and building up and making sure that you're continuing to make small improvements every day, those little moments mattered. I know when I pulled my best erg score, that I had worked so hard for that. And that was the pinnacle. And that wasn't even a race. We're down in McGonigal Hall back in the day. And, it was like a celebration. The football players came in, everybody came in when so it's not even just the competition part of it. It is that journey to get you to be the best that you could possibly be, and knowing that you've given it your all. That's what makes rowing, I think, a little bit different. But you're right. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. And it does take somebody special to stick with it. My two boys did not stick with it. I tried to, coach them towards it. They did 2 years in high school, both of them are like, no, because I think they're looking for, that immediate gratification, and it's not going to come. But that is life, right?
Right. Well, as you said, academics became a bigger focus as well, and I hope that Google has this right. You go get a master's degree from University of North Texas.
Yes, isn't that odd? Like
Yes.
they became part of our, like, they weren't back in the day. It was
No.
kind of a,
But it
and
was
then all of a sudden I'm like, this is weird. Now they're both from the same
It
division.
is funny, yeah. So not rival school, nothing to do with each other at the time, but you get your master's from
Right.
the University of North Texas, and you've been able to. We'll come back to I think advocacy for women's sports, but you don't have the ability to do that without obviously having some professional success. And chief executive officer at NeurAbilities Healthcare. Just tell me about the path that's kind of led you career-wise. Obviously, Temple sets the foundation for a lot of amazing things that you've been able to do in your career, and just kind of how that path has led you since your time here.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, psychology degree, over with Dr. Phil Heinlein. I was able to work in um, it's the experimental laboratory where we were training rats and pigeons, kind of a theory of philosophy of learning and human behavior. And then from there, I was able to work my senior year at the Children's Seashore House, which is now CHOP. But back in the day, it was the biobehavioral unit. It was a very unique division of psychology where it's specific applied behavior analysis, but it was for children with developmental delays and had significant behavior problems. Back in 1998, autism was just a word that nobody knew about. But working at the Seashore House, we had a very high amount of individuals with autism who had significant behavioral challenges as well as developmental delays. And our job was to actually remediate some of the behavior issues, increase some of the skills, and get them back in their homes. And I saw a difference at the Seashore House with 3 or 4 kids, and I said, you know what, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I want to make sure that these kids who can't speak, I can be an advocate for them. I can assure that these families have full support and continuum of care. And I had the choice to go to Western Michigan or North Texas or to stay at Temple, but I had already taken the classes at Temple. And my professor, Phil Heinlein, who I would consider to be my mentor even to this day, he said, Kathleen, get out of here, go get some different experience. This is a terminal master's degree, which is a clinical master's degree, but it'll also give you the experience in organizational behavioral management, because autism was I want to say it's like 1 in 490 at that point. I went to Texas. We started the North Texas Autism Project, and the numbers were obviously more than 1 in 400 at that point. So part of our charge at North Texas was to create an autism center whereby we trained clinicians as well as. So I built a business with, obviously the support of the university, but we created a business model where children could get access to high quality services and they wouldn't end up in a hospital. That was kind of my goal. It's like we keep them in the place where they're most successful, make sure the families are empowered, make sure the kids start getting those skills. And, ABA is the #1 recommended science at this point. for children with autism to remediate an early intervention, which is really just, how do we teach individuals to get language, because if you don't have language, you will have a problem with behavior. So back then, it was kind of very new. So fast forward to I graduated. I got a couple of different internships working in consulting areas, and then I moved back to Pennsylvania. I just started a company. I said, nobody else is doing this. There wasn't funding for it. So I got to know a lot of people in the city, and Temple proud, connections with a lot of people. And honestly, through the Temple connections, I was able to work with the city of Philadelphia, as well as the state, to get what's called IBHS. It used to be called Wraparound Services, but I was part of the Philadelphia task force and the initiative to increase access to children with autism to get that early intervention. In 2006, we passed regulation for that. So I moved back in '03. So worked for several years, just consulting, worked in New Jersey at the developmental facilities to reduce restraint for that population. So I was both a clinician as well as I look at the meta analysis of it, but I just knew we could do it better. So I started a company, fought for services, and then built that company up, sold it to private equity. Um, that was in order so that we could actually expand it. And that was in 2012. That was amazing. I got to work in a different area and then start to expand it with not just behavior analysis, but also speech and language, occupational therapy, physical therapy, but really pediatrics. I don't ignore the adult population, but I love the babies. And it's like you get early intervention matters there. So from there, after I sold the company, it got merged together and became Aviana Healthcare. So I was then recruited from there over to a New Jersey neurology office, and I got to work with neurologists. And then my focus started to shift a little bit, and we created with this group of physicians. NeurAbilities. So it was the Center for Neurological Neurodevelopmental Health, which is a mouthful. But NeurAbilities is brain and behavior, bring it both together. And it's what I learned there and what we developed there was an agnostic model, meaning regardless of diagnosis, we can help these kids. It doesn't have to be autism. We had Down syndrome individuals. We had individuals kind of the full spectrum of ADHD all the way through. But what my goal was to create a model by which we have the physicians who are working together in with the clinicians, because it's kind of fragmented in our world. The doctors are on one side, the psychologists are on another, the funding is different. My goal was to bring it together and have kind of a quote unquote one-stop shop, which is what I feel like we did. We opened up 18 centers in 18 months. That was not easy, but like that's that grit again. It's like, okay, every month, we're opening up another one because the need is there.
Yep.
And then from there, built that up, and I felt like it was time for me to actually take a step back and think about what do I want to do long term, and I want to go national. So for the past year and a half, I've been working with private equity to seek out and find companies whereby I can push in and we can expand the services and really impact at a large scale. So that's kind of the next venture here.
Well,
So having fun with it, but none of that would have been able to happen without, first of all, my Temple connections. It makes a difference. The ability to not have that immediate success, it takes a long time. By the time we got the IBHS regulations passed in '06, we really didn't implement them until 2012. So it was rough, and it was a push. But I think that's where I always go back to saying, like, my Temple pride, my grit, my success is our success, is the way that I feel it. And I don't feel like I'm successful until I help everyone, so.
well, I mean, I think there is the through line there of having to endure a lot of behind the scenes work and pushing the rock up the hill to finally see the result. And I mean, we could do a whole another hour on just that advocacy work and I mean the amazing things that you're doing. I think again, as a parent of two children,
Thank you.
It's quite literally life changing. And so we wish you all the best in that professional front. But I think the amazing thing is you really have tied these two parts of your life together in a really beautiful way. And I know you touched on it earlier, but the advocacy for women in sports, just last week or 2 weeks ago now, we had National Girls and Women in Sport Day on February 4th and celebrated here at Temple on February 7th with the women's basketball game at home against North Texas. you had the ability to come back and be honored as a part of some of the work that we're doing here at Temple for the last few years. You and Sharifa Howarth, who I know many folks know, she's been a guest on this podcast, a Temple alum who has done great work in terms of giving back. You have partnered on Diamond Dreams, which I think is a really neat event in terms of the philosophy of being able to bring together all women's sports at Temple for the common goal of specifically supporting women's sports. And we do have a moment here, I think, right now, and having been in this industry for a long time, the Caitlin Clark effect and some of the ways in which women's sports have become more salient and become a part of the national conversation. I think that, the work that you and Sharif and many others here at Temple have done to kind of take some of that energy that's out there and harness it in a really beautiful way for Temple. So I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about, the work that you've been able to do, and clearly it's meant a lot to you to try to give back and to try to make things better here for women athletes at Temple.
Yeah, I feel like Temple's in a unique situation with being an urban school, and having the NIL and all of, we didn't have that issue. We didn't have the funding issue. And so even I barely understand it. That's why I have Sharifa, because she is definitely the person who she knows all the rules and she will get her done. So I'm the one who's whispering in her ear, tell them this, because she's very boisterous and she's tenacious, to say the least. And I think both of us together are a really good tag team. But we both identified that sometimes the teams are actually competing against each other with the fundraising. Everybody has to, raise their own funds. And yes, there's a certain amount of funding that you get. But what we're missing is the overarching, how do we build all the women up, and create an endowment that is for what we need on a regular basis. Like the first couple of years, I was trying to get a new boat for the crew. And, that we were raising funds and, everybody was doing as much as they possibly could. But the next year it was the gymnast mat. And I thought, wow, why can't we think about, and this is kudos to Arthur and to the team over in the athletic department, because, we can all have good ideas, but it's a matter of executing those ideas. And so I take zero credit for executing. I feel like, I'm a part of it and I'm a set of hands that will work to get it done. But really, Arthur and his team have really pushed this forward and kept it at the forefront, which that to me is spectacular. And I want to support that as much as I possibly can. But the Diamond Dreams, the idea was to create an endowment for those things that we didn't necessarily plan for or have in the budget, or to kind of give a little bit of a support or a boost if we needed it for certain sports. And it gave Arthur the ability to kind of pick who needed it at what point without having the teams have to go back and raise their own funds. They still have to, and they're still competing in certain ways. But I feel like we Diamond Dreams can hit a different segment of the population, not just Temple grads. I work a lot in finance and with private equity, and I'm trying to get a lot more organizations to realize if you empower women early on, they are the best employees. And I can attest that at NeurAbilities, we hired at least 10 athletes. Not we actually the fencers, so Marguerite was like the most amazing. They're all of them had an amazing work ethic, but they also are the best employees long term. They show up on time. They
Absolutely.
they they are the ones
Absolutely.
who understand accountability, right? I don't care what sport they play, best employees ever. So if we start to think about empowering early on these women, who obviously are dedicated to their sport and they are gritty and they're going to work really hard. If we get organizations to kind of help fund some of that, then we won't be as far behind as the men. The men have a long history, and great. This is not degrading in any way, but they have a long history and of fundraising. They have a lot of people who are deeply enmeshed. We didn't have that, especially in the women's rowing.
Right.
Nobody, none of my family ever rowed. They weren't a part of, that culture. Whereas with the male athletes and with crew, it sometimes it's a family dynasty, and it goes back all the way to the beginning of time. We didn't have that. We were walking on, and we were like, yeah, this is great. So if we can create an avenue by which we can support women a little bit better, to me, that is me helping that next generation, because I see all the barriers that they have. But they're the future, right? And they're going to be the ones who make the world work.
Well, I think something that you and Sharifa have really hit on and been able to bridge the gap. I think sometimes we have a real difficult time here at Temple because of everything that you said, because we are gritty. We are underdog. We embrace that. We did it with less. We did it with nothing. And sometimes it's hard to bridge that philosophy and that ethos with the fact that, here we are in 2026, and yes, there is NIL, and yes, there is this, that, and the other, and college athletics, and sometimes that feels like the mission has shifted a little bit. And I think it can be hard. I think sometimes there's a tendency to just want to say, we did it with nothing, you do it with nothing, you make it work the way we did. And I think that you and Sharifa have both done a really nice job because you embody everything about Temple the way that, people that grew up here like myself think of Temple, think of what it is, the grittiness and the toughness, but that hasn't stopped you from wanting to leave it better than you found it and wanting to empower and build up this next generation. You've been able to hold both of those things simultaneously in a way that I think is really nice.
I think, no matter what support you have, athletics is hard. It's just plain old hard.
Yes.
And as the generations continue to grow, like, it doesn't have to be like, oh, I did it with nothing and then therefore. No, I did it with nothing. But you could be more successful if you had just a little bit of this. And we could win more and we can develop more if. So I think every generation has to look at the next one and say, what can I make better? You're absolutely right. Like, I do hear some people say, oh, well, they have it so easy and they have this and they have that. And it's like, you know what? I was very happy back in the day to get a pair of sneakers. Like, that was, like, our expectations were a little bit different. And the world's a little bit different, but it shouldn't mean, especially for Temple, it shouldn't mean that we negate feeding into them to make them better. It will only make the university better. It will only make our community better, quite honestly. Like, Temple Owls are everywhere. And if we support them at this level, they will consistently come back and they will continue to support. I think that that's what sometimes we're missing. We have to think about folding people in very early on to make sure that they're part of that they have that vision as well. That once you get a chance to give back, you do.
Well, I think one of the really special things, and I'm sure you've seen this with National Girls and Women in Sport Day in particular, I think is a chance to really embody that message. My favorite part of it hasn't even happened yet. It's the clinic that our student athletes put on where the young girls and women around the Philadelphia area can come in, and it's generally over in the indoor turf over at the Star Building, and they can fence with foam noodles, and they can get on an erg, and they can do all these different things and just get to see the opportunities that exist that they may not even be considering. I think that's the most powerful thing. I know that the game itself and the game that we had on the 7th was a really special moment. We got to bring together a lot of our women's sports teams here at Temple, which is great. Anytime, again, you can get those different pieces together, I think it becomes, larger than the individual parts, kind of like we talked about with Diamond Dreams. But I think there is something really unique and special about Temple's place within this community that goes one step further in terms of really empowering a part of the population that I think needs that, needs those opportunities modeled for them. And so that's happening, I believe, in April or later this spring. But that's one of the really great ways that we can give back here as well. And I'm sure
Exposure.
that means a lot to you. Yeah.
Yeah, when you see what the possibilities are, like, who would have ever thought fencing? Like, when in Northeast Philadelphia, I never, you know what I mean? Like, that's a thing that you see on television every 4 years. But when you meet the fencers at Temple, it is spectacular. I wish I would have taken up fencing, so just having
less cardio too.
community. Yeah, less cardio, but it seems a lot harder, actually. And you don't get stabbed. You might drown if you do something wrong, but but yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think, Temple has an amazing opportunity to enhance and develop women in North Philadelphia, quite honestly. And that's been a mission as well. And I think they've been very good about including a lot of the community, which has been great. But you're absolutely right. Like, if they can get some exposure, especially the young women, that would be amazing. I'm trying to get everybody to go to Temple, obviously.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I think this is a really exciting time at Temple for all the reasons that you mentioned, and I think it's clearly, hearing about your professional pursuits an exciting time for you as well. And you just think of how much things have changed in the last 20, 30 years, both in terms of the athletic landscape, in terms of the landscape of autism and behavioral science, and the world just keeps moving forward. And I'm wondering, because you have your hands in so many different things, just what excites you the most? Because sometimes it's easy to get lost in the doom and gloom of it all right now, but I think you're really able to have your hands on a number of positive changes in society and culture. And I'm just wondering, kind of what in and around Temple and your work excites you the most as we look forward.
Well, I'm working with the College of Education right now in where they house their master's program for behavior analysis. The dean over there has been quite amazing. And so I sit on the board of visitors, which I'm not sure if I'm contributing or not, but that excites me because every time I'm on with, Dean Shealy, and she's an avid women's sports enthusiast. I think that's how we got connected. But helping her to achieve the mission that they're increasing access in Philly with the school districts. They're training some of the teachers and getting certified teachers in place for the city, assisting the city of Philadelphia and the school district to really enhance the services, input technology, work with the AI, and then also make sure that we're, continuing to give back to the community and expand our presence as Temple and our excellence and input that into the school districts. That's kind of one of my side hustles that I'm just super excited about. We're also looking to develop a training program for new clinicians. We never have enough clinicians. The diagnoses in behavioral health, as well as all of healthcare, you see it skyrocket. And there's a lot more kids identified, and there's a lot more kids not getting access in certain areas of Philadelphia specifically. And they don't always have people who can push into the home. They have to travel out, and that's not always feasible. So the goal with the College of Education is we're going to create a training ground for clinicians, but also the kids in the community will be able to push in. So we'll be able to have practicum opportunities, and then these kids get the services that they need because early intervention matters. So I get very excited about all the stuff that, the College of Education is doing, and I feel like I'm riding Dean Shealy's coattails. But any which way I can and help her, that to me is super exciting. In the field overall, our diagnoses are there and we're getting more precise with our treatment. And I think it's been heartening to see that Philly's been a champion of developmental disabilities and services. Community behavioral health has been a beacon for actually a model for a lot of the national programs. So what I see happening in Philly and how they've rallied around supporting and making sure that there's funding for behavioral health services, not just on the autism space, but also addictions and mental health issues all the way front to back. And Temple's been a little part of that, but Philly has created a model where I would love to be able to replicate it in other cities and other areas and in rural areas, quite honestly. So that's my big dream. We'll see. But I get excited about that.
Well, this is an inspiring message, and I hope that anyone listening can see, I think of it like kind of throwing the pebble into the lake. You think of investing in, something small, female student athletes at Temple, the ripple outward to the student-athlete population at Temple, the ripple outward to the Temple University community and the colleges, the College of Ed, and the ripple out to the Philadelphia community and then the world. And I think you are a living example of what that investment looks like, and how you've been able to pay it forward is really inspiring. And I know that we'll continue to talk, but I wish you all the best in all of these endeavors, and we're very grateful for everything you've been able to do for us here at Temple.
That's super kind, Kevin. I thank you for that, but it's never one person. Like, you realize that, I mean, the reason that I've been able to help is because of Dean Shealy, is because of Arthur, it's because of everybody at Temple who's rallied around, Sharifa, who won't let me get away with anything. So thank you for your kind words, but really there's a lot more work to do.
All right, that's this week's episode of the Owl Pod. I want to thank my guest, Kathleen Stengel. And if you missed it, David Litvin and Amelia Wright kicked off our unofficial Temple Rowing Week here on the Owl Pod with an interview with Amanda Morelli on Tuesday. Make sure to check that out. They'll be back on Tuesday. I'll be back with you next Friday with all new episodes. If you want to support the Owl Pod, please be sure to subscribe, leave a rating. Most of all, please tell your friends. You can listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, anywhere you get your podcasts, and follow us on Instagram at The Owl Podcast. Special thanks once again to our Alpod team, Christy Bannon, Justin Miller, Prince Moody. Our executive producer is Dan Lobaz. I'm Kevin Copp. Thank you all so much for listening, everyone, and go Owls.